Hey, everybody. Andy here. With me, like Harsha said, is Dr. Bob Crabtree. Hey, Bob.
Good morning, everyone. Hi, Andy.
Hi there. We wanted to do a quick sound check because Bob is hailing from the greater Yellowstone area. Are you in the park today, Bob, or are you in Bozeman?
I'm in Bozeman, near the boundaries. Well, in the ecosystem.
In the ecosystem. So one of the cool things about working in the Yellowstone area is that if you're not in Bozeman and you're not in the park yourself, you are probably in a place called Paradise Valley. There's some other places as well, but I always thought that it was pretty neat that you would that on your way to Yellowstone you have to pass through Paradise. It's pretty apt. So before we begin and before we get in, I wanted to help orient everyone with some of the matter that Harsha just covered. Let's just begin with Crowd for Good and what brings us here today and why we're focusing on YERC, the Yellowstone Ecological Research Center. I'm going to share my screen and Harshit, when you come back, you're going to have to turn on screen sharing for me. So in the meantime, I guess we could just, okay, thanks Harshit. So as Harshit mentioned, Topcoder is engaged in Crowd for Good. At any given time, we have one or more programs running where members are able to contribute your time and help a cause that we think is probably interesting to our community, certainly that helps the world at large in some fashion or another. One of the ones we're running right now is for YERC, and Bob's here today to help explain what the impact of Topcoder members' contributions will be. But when we have you participate in Crowd for Good, it isn't just volunteering hours, of course, although we're always happy to accept them. It is Topcoder, so there are prizes. It isn't always money, although right now we're fortunate to have some high priority items where we're able to have funding and there are some cash prizes available. The incentives are different. It can be a trip to the TCO. It can be and it can be a trip to the park, and Bob will explain some of what that might be later in our talk today. But let us have a look at my admittedly busy dashboard and have a peek at Topcoder. If you go to our community site, you should be able to find Crowd for Good. And underneath that, you'll find this. This is YERC. This is our YERC presence on the Topcoder site. And we talk about it as preventative healthcare for ecosystems. Stay tuned to learn about what that is. But here on our Crowd for Good site, you can find a description of what YERC is all about. You can get to YERC, and here's our prizes and leaderboard. We've been running a series of challenges for YERC for the last 6 months or so now. We're going to be doing it for the year to come. And there's all kinds of really cool stuff on here that you can take advantage of. There are guided tours at stake with none other than Bob himself, who's a celebrity. He won't tell you that. That's what I'm here for. So you'll be able to, we'll get into what that might be a little later. We have some virtual workshops that are coming up. There are TCO points, of course. And we have some really spiffy hats that you get. You have to excuse me. I didn't win anything to get that hat, but that's okay. I get to do this. We also have shirts, and there are lots of maps that are available as well. There's all kinds of really cool stuff to connect yourself to Yellowstone. And of course, we have newsletters that will be going out in the YERC through the entire YERC ecosystem as well. I should also mention, just for transparency, I'm a member of the board for Yellowstone Ecological Research Center. Bob's the executive director. And as we leave the site here and go into our portion with Bob and YERC itself, remember this, is that as a member of Topcoder, there's always an opportunity to do something more in the world. There's always a mission for you if you're looking for it. That mission might be learning a new skill. It might be applying a great skill that you have to a really thorny problem in the world. It might be participating, like many of our members did earlier this year, in the COVID research, or even better yet, in working on the model that governed the clinical studies that Johnson & Johnson performed. And now, of course, the vaccine is out in the market. There's always a way to make an impact at Topcoder. This one is a great way to help with ecology. So as let me wrap up with a couple remarks here. If you're not familiar with it, Yellowstone is a national park in the United States. It's one of the largest in the world. I could not possibly do it justice with a description. So please do Google it if you're not familiar with it. And Bob will no doubt explain part of it as well. So without further ado, Bob, let me turn the microphone over to you. And if you're ready, let me ask a few questions.
Absolutely.
Want to do a quick comms check? All right. So Bob, let's start with an easy one. Would you mind taking a few minutes to tell us about yourself and how you got your start in ecology?
Yeah, I kind of grew up in a small town in North Idaho, and I grew up genetically being very close to nature. I had probably the neighborhood's best butterfly collection, and I soon learned my bird calls in high school. So I was kind of destined to be a wildlife ecologist, and actually decided I wanted to do that in sixth grade. And then I went on to college at various places in the West and kind of gathered my skills and learning. But I did it very diversely too. I mean, I loved programming. It's a class I took in my freshman year at the University of Idaho. And then I went on to do a master's degree and PhD and postdocs at various places. And then I kind of decided I wanted to dedicate my career to one place, one special place. And I got really lucky and got a couple grants. One to study model the effects of the coming wolf reintroduction in Yellowstone National Park. And the other one was to study how the effects of fires, the great fires of 1988, which burned about a third of the park, what impacts it would have on predator-prey relationships. So I scurried myself from California at a postdoc to a little town called Gardner, Montana at the north entrance, and started research and monitoring of this entire huge area. It's a 20 million acre area called the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem, and I started in the park itself.
Awesome. That's a heck of a journey. Thanks, Bob. So maybe we should take a moment to talk about ecology and environmental science. So for example, let's pull up a visual here. We hear the term a good bit, especially these days. And forgive me, I'm trying to share my screen. And of course, I think what people have in mind at first is, this is not what I wanted to show. What people may have in mind at first is, give me a sec here.
Give me 10 seconds. My dog just opened the door and it's 20 degrees. I'll be back in 20 seconds.
No problem, Bob.
Yeah,
while Bob
sharing or all good?
Yeah, I'm gonna try sharing again here.
Okay, it works, yes.
Okay, thank you. So I think I'm gonna try to present. When we hear about ecology, sometimes I think folks have this in mind first, right? We're gonna study animals or cute animals or the land around them, because it lets you do things like this, kind of get out in the wild and camp. It's a great excuse so that you can get great pictures of things like that, of animals being animals in the wild and defending their turf. And then what you come to really learn is that it's this. That it's meticulous tracking of information to show how animal systems actually behave. Now, the difference between ecology and environmental science is probably one that if you poll 100 people on the street, you're going to get several different answers. So, Bob, would you mind reflecting on that and helping us understand what's the difference between ecology, what you do, and let's say environmental science?
Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, I dedicated myself to one place and I wanted to learn everything there is about the living systems, or what is often referred to as biodiversity, in one location. And of course, this one location was, one of the most pristine areas in the world, and certainly in the lower 48 states. And it was the world's first national park, which really started a tradition. And so I thought it'd be a great place to learn about impacts just like you folks are helping to have a crowd for good impact on the living systems we all rely upon. I really wanted to focus on, the health of this one area and understanding how everything works together. A lot of times we do research and monitoring that I guess is kind of piecemeal. So it's like the old thought where if you want to study how a clock works, you have to kind of understand how all the parts work together. And so an example here is a perfect example of an impact. This is one of the two species most impacted by wolves. And you may have heard of the reintroduction of wolves back into Yellowstone that brought back the last missing part. And you'll see that this is what one species impact is on all the other prey that they use to survive and reproduce and create those puppies that you just saw a picture of. And so if you don't understand how all these things work together, you really can't understand impacts. And what Andy mentioned earlier, which is one of our real strong themes, it's a thread that runs through everything we do. And that is, you have to understand the health of these ecosystems because our own health relies upon them.
Speaking for myself, this is one of the areas where I've been most interested, because myself, as well as probably most of the folks listening to this webinar, come from a systems background. It might be data science, it might be software engineering, but we all come from a systems background. And so a chart like this might show what wolves and coyotes are eating and then complex interactions between them. I immediately think, well, I have my legacy systems, I have my high throughput systems, I have my analytics systems, I have my online transaction systems, and taking down one usually will impact another. And there's a whole field of study about studying those interrelationships. So it seems like, in a sense, a lot of what ecology is doing, or a lot of what Jörg is studying, is a systems integration problem. So, Bob, is that a good analogy? Would you say that that's something that's what Jörg studies, or would you want to add a little color to that?
I think that's a perfect analogy, Andy. I mean, I started as a wildlife biologist and became a wildlife ecologist, and then what's called a landscape ecologist. A lot of work with maps and remote sensing, and I got involved in technology, and I soon learned that if I didn't have technology, I couldn't possibly take a systems approach to a large area.
So we have people in the fields that collect data and bring it back. Some of it gets written down, some of it gets brought back to the farm. And we'll get into how that's done in a minute. But right now, today, there's a tremendous amount of information that is collected. And yet, conservation and wildlife management continue to be hard problems. What are your thoughts on what makes those topics so difficult, and what can be done to improve it?
Well, first off, it's a large area. And again, if you take a piecemeal approach, you'll only understand one cog in the big watch. And so there's just no way to access information and monitor all the health diagnostics of a large area if you don't use technology. I mean, it's just so expensive to understand a very large area, which is, the basic subdivision of our Earth. Our backyard watersheds, the clean water we drink, is a huge area, and you really have to understand impacts. But you know what? You can do all the research you want, and it's really not going to matter that much unless everybody has access to that information. And your example of preventative healthcare was perfect. I mean, imagine yourself going into to check on your health. Maybe it's just a wellness check. That's monitoring. And the doctor might prescribe 27 blood serum parameters to see what could be wrong with your complex system, your body. Well, so think of a big ecosystem and all the diagnostics and all the information that we really need to hold our hand to the pulse of the ecosystem, not just to maintain its health, but maybe to restore it in case it's sick somewhere. So we envisioned this grand idea that you see a slide of here called Epic. So it's a big cloud-based platform that we're relying mostly upon Topcoder and all you folks to help us build. It stands for Ecosystem Prognosis, Impacts, and Information Cooperative. So again, one of those acronyms, but I think it gives you an idea of what we're trying to do. And that is have a platform that you anywhere in the world could check on the health of this ecosystem. And in doing so, we're building in a way that's transferable, that could be applied to any ecosystem in the world, including the one you live in.
Thanks, Bob. So if I go, using your analogy, if I go into the doctor and have my regular checkup and I have a lipid panel done, they'll check the triglycerides and a few other things, and they might tell me, okay, guess what? Bad news, you have diabetes. But good news, there's an intervention for this. So in those cases, there's, the purpose of the monitoring is because there's an intervention that can be done. Does the same analogy apply in ecology? And I put it another way, how does the data that we collect through sensors, through direct observation, through testing, help us make decisions or run interventions? Are there even interventions possible?
Great point. And I like to bring it back to that medical analogy, and it's kind of a progression of thinking. It's the research that identifies the right diagnostics. And we see that in medicine. In fact, some of the top, scientific advances in the world have been from, the medical research and medical science. And now it's big tech and also the military. We often live off a lot of technology that's handed down, you might say. So we put it to work for the good. So that's the research that backs up the monitoring. Now you have massive monitoring, and we can't possibly understand the impacts or guide our health diagnostics or allow us to develop a prognosis of how to improve our health. So we censor up the ecosystem to to provide the monitoring that's absolutely required. It's the baseline, it's the benchmark. And then we go ahead and move on to what we're really trying to pioneer, and that's a precision ecology. It's predictive modeling, both in short-term forecasts and what we call what-if scenarios. And a what-if scenario might be like you talking to your doctor, Andy, after you found you're a diabetic. The doctor's going to tell you about, if you do this, this will happen. If you change your diet, this might happen. You can try this, prescription. You can do exercise. So those are what if scenarios that will help you understand how to get back to a healthy lifestyle. So in an ecosystem, it's pretty much the same thing, only probably a lot more working parts and a lot more variability, but it's feasible if we distribute our sensors and our monitoring over large areas, and then we have to have access to it on the platform. So it's like, it would be almost like, Andy, you go into a whole panel of doctors getting many different advocates and second and third and fourth opinions, so you can be involved in how you can maintain and recover your health.
Well, a health dashboard is always a revealing thing. I'm not sure I would want to look at one after this year of COVID, but I would like to examine a little more one of the ideas you just brought up on interventions again. Sticking with my hypothetical, by the way, diabetes. One of the interventions might be, the doctor would tell me, would be, okay, you can exercise, right? That's a terrific modality for reducing triglycerides. Or they might say, it's too late, you have to go on insulin. But both of those interventions are based on a ton of prior research where the efficacy of that is already baseline and known. So if my profile is similar to another known profile and a few other parameters are the same, a doctor can say, this intervention probably will work for you. Do we have anything similar to that in wildlife management or ecology today, where we can say we know within this interval of confidence that this intervention will work? Or do we still need to build that knowledge?
We definitely have the structure in place. That's a prototype, but we do not have for example, nature's equivalent to weather forecasting, or we call ecological forecasting or ecosystem prognosis. And you can see in this background image a perfect example of that, of how we might proceed to get to improved ecosystem health as well as improved human health. So you see a couple of researchers, what's doing called converting stream height. You can see they're measuring the height, and that's a little flow meter. You convert variable stream heights to known discharge. And there's a little sensor there that's always measuring stream height. And then we run it through the cloud and it converts it to discharge. Well, why is that important? Because we might be in a drought, and the farmer or rancher that needs irrigation water doesn't want to take too much. But he also has to be concerned about his livelihood, his family's livelihood, and his own business to maintain, a healthy life. Well, there's also about probably, I would guess, several thousand species that inhabit this stream, and they also benefit by having enough water. So, you might be able to come to EPIC and say, hey, I want to put in a new big irrigation crop circle. And because we have a model running in the background that's chock full of empirical data, we can bring that crop circle to the prognoses and say, okay, how much water is that going to take when? What's going to be its impact on the whole watershed and on that tributary? Maybe there's not enough flow for trout that spawn in July in this stream right here. Is there enough water for the fry, the small baby trout, to get back to the main stem of the Yellowstone River? So, this platform will be a place where you can not only check on diagnostics of health for this tributary, which is part of the greater watershed and the whole ecosystem, but also understand how, climate impacts and drought impacts might affect the whole system, including humans.
Got it. So sticking with the medical analogy, we have with EPIC, your aim is to be able to at least begin to diagnose. Today maybe we're in medicine what would be the 18th or the 19th century of diagnosis. It isn't until a disease presents with a completely obvious, impossible to miss sarcoma that you can then say, guess what, you're sick. It sounds like, if again sticking with the medical analogy, you have diagnosis, prognosis, and interventions that can change the prognosis. Today, with systems like EPIC, we at least will be better at diagnosis. To be able to say that, and this is hypothetical, Bob, so keep me honest here, but to be able to say that because of the change in stream data that we see from the Yellowstone River, you can expect, if you're in the greater watershed of the Yellowstone River, that you're going to have 20% less moisture in your grazing field over the next year. And this would be a novel source of that information. That isn't data that somebody would have access to today. Is that right?
That's right. It's, again, kind of a piecemeal approach, and we all talk about working together. We all say that, but it's not commonly done for whatever reason. So state and federal agencies have their programs and their data sets. Sometimes there's a private effort like the one you see here, the one we're spearheading. And then there's university research. And then there's just landowners that kind of keep check of their land. But there's no one place to bring all that information to share among all those that have contributed it. It's like if you were to go to a doctor and ask, him, I have these strange symptoms, what do I do? Well, if he can't go to a database and be able to communicate to all the other doctors and have access to this massive amount of information, he's not going to be able to diagnose what the problem is, let alone how to have a prognosis and intervene to improve health.
Got it. Thank you. So it sounds like, in a sense, this is almost becoming a WebMD of ecology, at least in the greater Yellowstone area. In a moment here, I'll see if I can pull up a map of one of our maps of the greater Yellowstone area. just to give folks a sense of how large it is. But let's drill in a little further, if you don't mind, on interventions. So
Yes.
I can almost imagine that there are first order and second order interventions. Just for the sake of argument, let's say a first order intervention would be cultural knowledge. Like you have, because of something like EPIC, you have reasonably high confidence that moisture in your grazing fields will be low. So you're going to rotate your herd more often or have them in a different area. You might even lease a different plot of land
Yes.
where they're going to have better access to it. That's a first order, because every rancher, every farmer knows to do that kind of thing if they're warned well enough in advance. But then there might be second order interventions. So back again to a medical analogy, insulin for diabetes is a second order one, right? That's not something that just stands out as obvious. You know, you had to distill insulin from another creature and recognize that that was the shortage that was causing the problem, and then artificially supplement that. Are there second order interventions today in environments and ecology or wildlife management?
Yeah, I mean, I think you bring it up a whole bunch of good points. And one I often like to tell is sometimes no intervention is the best intervention. But how do you even know that if you don't have diagnostics and not continual real-time or near real-time monitoring of all those diagnostics in order to make decisions? And when you do take an intervention, you know, you have to have kind of the understanding of process so you know what impact that intervention is going to have. Because sometimes you have these secondary or indirect effects. For example, you know, introducing myxomyces or introducing, mongoose in Hawaii to control rats. Well, that had some terrible secondary effects that actually hurt the health of the Hawaiian Islands, for example, when mongoose are introduced. So yeah, there's, you might say, this manifold effect of you really have to understand the system if you're going to take action. Sometimes no action is the best. Sometimes it's simple action at the local scale that is the best solution, because to have to prescribe something over a large area, let's say we want to fly and inoculate trees so they don't get some disease. Well, one, it's probably not economically justified to do that. It would probably cost several $billions to spray to keep a disease in our national forest from spreading, but it's probably going to have some bad secondary impacts. So if we don't have the diagnostics and we don't know how to bring that monitoring into predictive models, then we really can't do a good job. And then the key that's circular here is, how well do we know how our models work if we don't measure the impact and watch how the system responds in a healthy manner? Because it might go off into some worse state if we don't have a really good understanding of pattern and process and that progression. Sorry for all these terms of monitoring, the diagnostics and all the research to back it up, and then bring that into this predictive ecological forecasting framework.
Got it. So it's reasonable to say then that by collecting this data, we can at least get better at diagnostics. Then there's an inventory of interventions that people kind of know, and we can develop an inventory of hypothetical interventions. And now for the first time, okay, cool. So for the first time, we can start comparing what the actual outcome is of a proposed intervention that someone runs as an experiment, and measure its efficacy quickly.
And you bring up a point I want to reemphasize, and that is, when humans do interventions on nature, I hate to say this, but a large majority of the time it has bad impacts because we don't understand, we don't have enough information. We haven't played these what if scenarios, these intervention strategies you talked about. So just think about if all the decision makers gathered around the table and spend a day playing these scenarios at a center where EPIC is operating. So it's grabbing information on diagnostics from all over. And someone says, hey, let's put in an irrigation crop circle, or let's simulate drought. Let's see what it might do to the system, because if we don't start doing this, we are going to keep making mistakes. In fact, 99% of the time we do a reintroduction, or 99% of the time we try to fix a problem. I hate to say it, but it doesn't work out very well. So it's due time that we start building essentially a preventative medical healthcare system for our watersheds and our ecosystems that we rely upon for our own health.
Thanks, Bob. Actually, I didn't realize it was that bad. So it's an exciting opportunity. Let's go back to literally 100,000 feet for a second and get a sense of the scale and scope of Yellowstone and the laboratory that you're basically circling with this effort. So we've talked about how data can help. We've talked about the need for it, tracking diagnostics, what kind of information gets you those diagnostics. But now let's take a look at the scope of the problem. I'm going to share my screen again, and I hope it's more appropriate this time. Let's share my screen. And here we go. So where is Yellowstone? What you're looking at right here is the Midwestern United States. Here's Canada up here, here's Wyoming, here's Idaho, here's Utah, here's Montana. Yellowstone covers this huge area. You can see it's quite sizey. So let's drill in. And hopefully this is reasonably smooth. Again, you've probably, maybe if you're a skier, you've probably heard of some of these places. Here's Big Sky. This is a famous ski resort. Here is Bozeman, Montana, one of the largest cities in the Montana area. Here's Yellowstone National Park. And you can see again that it covers the borders between Wyoming, Montana, and a little bit of Idaho. And we'll drill in a little bit further, and I think some borders will start to appear. You can just make out this box that goes around the park. And this is the greater Yellowstone area. And it too is surrounded by some national parks. So if you're not familiar with this portion of the US, it is the Rocky Mountains. It's loaded with gigantic forests that are ancient. And the Yellowstone area itself is kind of interesting because it is, in fact, a volcano. So I'm not correctly circling this, but it is an ancient and absolutely gigantic caldera. And that's why you have things like Old Faithful. Hopefully you've heard of that before, but it's a geyser that goes off every 90 minutes, Bob?
Yes.
So it goes off, it's very, very hot, but the whole area is loaded with geysers. The Native Americans who populated this area 10,000 years ago or more were very familiar with the ground, how dangerous it was, but also how plentiful it was. So where you were able to graze or where you're able to hunt at certain times of the year, where you collected other certain times of the year, where it was safe to transit. Because of course it's coming off the Great Plains that are flat for hundreds and thousands of miles. So why is all this relevant? The reason this is relevant is because you have water that flows from up here, it goes down there, or that flows from here and goes out that way. So you've established a pretty solid laboratory where you actually know your inputs and your outputs. But the scale of it is tremendous. So Bob, how large is the area that you typically study? How many millions of acres?
20 million acres. The park's about 1/10 of that, is 2.2 million acres, that kind of darker green box there.
Got it. So it's a truly enormous area that this would work for. So that brings up the question to me as like, reasonably speaking, what kinds of, let's say this is the efforts with Yerk and the EPIC platform are successful. About how many years would it, in the future, would it take before we could look to interventions having an impact? Is this something that's just over the horizon next year? Is it Is it 2 years from now? Is it 5 years from now? What are your thoughts on the event horizon?
Excellent question, Andy. What we did is we took, if you back out just a touch, you can divide the Yellowstone ecosystem into 6 non-overlapping large watersheds, some on one side of the continental divide and some on the other. So we're taking it one watershed at a time. And if you look at kind of that tan strip, that real long tan strip coming north out of the park, Andy, from Gardner to Livingston, that's our beloved Paradise Valley. And that is the upper Yellowstone watershed, one of these 6 watersheds. So we're essentially building out a variety of programs, research and monitoring programs in one watershed at a time. And our first inaugural research and monitoring network was called, believe it or not, RiverNet. In fact, Andy was there about 3 years ago when we envisioned the future of Yellowstone. And so we're now in our 4th year of RiverNet monitoring. And you saw a picture of, how we're looking at water quality parameters, like those blood serum parameters when you go to see your doctor, discharge, which is the amount of water that's flowing at any given time, and a lot of things related to streams and rivers, like stream bank erosion and sediment transport and riparian vegetation and beaver and songbirds, all things related to healthy systems, but also when those diagnostics decline, unhealthy systems that need a restoration. And then we're starting 2 other programs, LandNet, a network of monitoring and modeling for the landscape, things like soil moisture or vegetation mapping. And then another program called WildNet, because we care about our wildlife and we got to monitor our wildlife because we're using it a lot, whether we're hunters or whether we're photographers. And then we're spreading these into other ecosystems. Like this year, we're moving RiverNet over to the left where it says Ennis. That's the upper Madison. You can see just to the left there. Yeah, that's Ennis. That's probably the most famous blue ribbon trout stream in the lower 48 states. And we're also starting RiverNet down in the upper Snake. If you go down to the south, you'll see Grand Teton National Park and a famous place called Jackson Hole, Wyoming. So in fact, we have a webinar setting that to design the criteria for deploying sensors and people in about 10 days. And we'll be doing that this year. And then eventually LandNet and WildNet will come along behind and will encompass all 6 watersheds, we think, over the next 10 years, while we're building the information platform.
Incredibly ambitious. This is fantastic.
Very ambitious, but what better place to do it than Yellowstone, Andy? So if you don't mind me saying, this was the world's first national park, and it set a standard back in the 1870s where countries around the world started protecting their lands and their water and their wildlife in preserves and national parks. So what better place to start this grand, ambitious project than Yellowstone and bring conservation leaders and you all, to help. It's your national park too. The Park Service encourages international visitors. So really, I think the greatest contribution the greater Yellowstone can make is by what you all do to bring us into the 21st century of technology and protection and sustainability of all the wonderful things that are encompassed here in Yellowstone, and then bring that lesson to your own backyard watersheds. So Andy, I just had to say that. So I know that's a big pitch, but I get really excited about it. So it does look really ambitious, but you know what? Yellowstone knows how to do ambitious things.
And has been doing it for a long time. Incidentally, the authority from the U.S. Congress that approved setting aside this park here was driven, or at least inspired in large part, by a gigantic painting that was executed in 1870, somewhere around there, about one of the waterfalls in this area. So they wheeled it into the halls of Congress, and everybody looked at it, both sides, both parties voted yay, and we have the park today. So Bob, we have.
Go ahead.
I beg your pardon. You're saying?
Yeah, I mean, there were several research expeditions, but what they were really doing was doing an inventory and assessment of these famed and rumored wonders of this area and, incredible wildlife populations and geysers and, abundant water and beaver populations and just natural wonders that were rumored about amongst the original pioneers and fur trappers of the era, you know, all and then indigenous Native American oral tradition of this magical, wonderful place. So, the Congress funded this expedition and they went out there on several trips, but in particular, the Henry Jackson photo of the upper and lower falls and the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone and wildlife and all these wonders and geysers. Congress was absolutely amazed because guess what? Technology worked. Back then, the technology was photographs and compasses. And we all know that scientific revolutions and conservation breakthroughs often are reliant upon working together, but also applying the latest, best technology that you all are involved in.
So what EPIC is doing and what we're engaged in is really continuing a long tradition of bringing technology to Yellowstone Park to help understand nature better and how these resources interact with each other. The old will be new again. So we have about 10 minutes left. Bob, before we let you go, I wanted to ask one more question of you. Today, we have dozens of Topcoder members who've contributed their time to building the EPIC platform. And by the way, if you haven't seen it, please go onto the website, go onto the challenges, and check them out. In fact, I think I have one of them up here on my screen. You can jump in here. We have one that has prize money. We have another one that has TCO points and it puts you in the running for a personalized virtual tour, or if you want to come out to the park, a real tour with Dr. Crabtree here. So people are contributing their time and working on building out this WebMD for ecological research. So this is a great time, Bob, to ask you, what does the future look like? What kind of impact are our members having by contributing their time to this platform?
Well, I think it's getting on and being a pioneer at this massive, ambitious effort, and it's happening. And we've been working with you folks for around 6 months now, and great things are happening. So, what you can do is get involved in these challenge prizes and help pioneer this ambitious effort in a world famous place where I believe everyone is going to be watching like they have, for the past 150 years. Come and visit and, see how the technologies at work. In fact, the map Andy was just showing, you might be driving by this road and point your mobile app and see all the sensor data coming from that area and look at predictions, not just weather forecasting, but, how big is the drought or how much snowmelt do we have? And then maybe be able to understand what wildlife you might see when you come around the bend of that road.
Thanks, Bob. So as we get started in our closing remarks here, I'm going to zoom back out and let's return to the scale of the problem and who's impacted by a solution like this right off the bat. The park is awe-inspiring because it's one of the beautiful places in the world. There are many on every continent, but this one here is one of the most accessible to the folks here in North America. But what makes it an interesting laboratory and has, frankly, economic and social impact right away is that this is one of the regions where a lot of the beef and soy and wheat in the United States hails from. So by understanding, and I'm going to return to the map view here, by understanding how wildlife interacts, how interventions in this park, which incidentally is home to one of the few remaining wild packs of bison, which if you haven't seen them, they're the size of a car, they're enormous. So imagine a whole herd of Volkswagens coming at you all at once, right? Actually, it's probably better to say large Jeeps or something. They're bigger than a Volkswagen. But it's one of the areas where a change in the park causes these animals to go outside of the park and maybe disrupt somebody's operations. So understanding what's happening in the park, understanding what's happening with the water and the nutrient flow and the climate in the area helps everybody who is growing crops or raising livestock in all of these areas here, all of these tan areas that you see, react faster, protect their herds, protect their investments, use better choices for crop rotation, perhaps, that are more sustainable, that might rely on less impactful weed prevention strategies and things of that kind. So what's at stake is being able to build a platform that gives people real-time information to understand all of this stuff. In the beginning, it's highly diagnostic with an inventory of known interventions. As time goes on, and very quickly, there'll be a larger set of interventions with confidence attached to them, where they've worked before. In software, we'd be looking at them as case studies. Yes, of course, I've set up Confluent before. Here are my 5 case studies with Fortune 100 customers that show how it's been done. Same thing with Informatica, et cetera. This is the same concept that's being brought now to the natural world. So if you're at home and you're following along and you've got a little bit of time and you want to get involved, please do. Please check out Crowd for Good, check out YERC. There are a lot of ways to participate. If you're inclined and you'd like to, you can donate financially. We're even more interested, though, in donating your time. Join the mission. If you do, you put yourself in the running for some terrific prizes. Kid you not, there are live tours of the park if you're able to come join us. If you're not able to fly out to the US and see the park, then Bob and his team will put together a virtual tour just for you. You'll consult with him and explain what your interests are. He'll talk you through some different parts of the park or the ecosystem, and we'll film it for you and get it out to you. And then finally, if you do participate and you win a task on the Epic platform as you're building it out, you'll be credited. So as the application is being built, we're also inaugurating a new and really cool feature out of Topcoder that we're calling basically graffiti. So you'll be able to pull up the application, click on an information button, and behind it will be the names of everybody who contributed to that widget. Either the front end piece or the part behind it. It's part of the deal of our working with YERC in producing this. So Bob, as we close out here, we have a couple more minutes. Do you have any closing remarks that you'd like to share?
Sure. I mean, to get back to our analogy, and thank you for that, Andy, of, human medicine in the human body and ecosystems. So just imagine this whole area having its own circulatory system, the water, and its own immune system, how it responds to fires or other disturbance impacts, and structure and function, and on and on. And just imagine a massive human body splayed out over this whole area. How are we going to maintain its health? How are we going to develop a preventative health care? And how are we going to recover the health? And you can be part of that body by being involved in this project.
And like any other systems integration project, the techniques, the tools, the practices, and the procedures that get deployed for this ecosystem should work for any ecosystem. So what we learned here can be transportable and reapplied to any watershed, any ecosystem in the world.
Yep, it's probably going to boil down to zeros and ones, and those are the building blocks we need to make all this happen.
And obviously the opportunity for data science and artificial intelligence of this is tremendous, absolutely tremendous. From from the math models that been used for years to try to predict species progression from, let's say, coniferous to deciduous trees, to being able to model what impacts might happen when you have enough parameters measured to be able to say with certainty that they'll stay within these ranges, is obviously one of the areas that I'm real interested in. So with that, thank you everybody who's been able to join us during this webinar. If you are following along at home after the recording, thank you for spending an hour with us here today. My name is Andy Lamora. I run data science here at Topcoder, member of the board at Yellowstone Ecological Research Center, and we've been visiting with Dr. Bob Crabtree, Executive Director of YERC and Conservator Extraordinaire. Harshit, back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Thanks, Bob. This was really interesting. I think I wish it could have gone for 1 more hour and I could listen to you of how, analytics is being used in so much depth at, learning all about the ecology. So much so thanks a lot for doing this, Bob. Thanks a lot for taking our time, and thanks a lot, Andy, for all the questions you had, and you could take out so much of things from Bob. So thanks, guys. Thanks everyone who joined us today, and thanks to everyone as well who's going to watch it on YouTube. So and if you're watching it right now, we'll be posting it on YouTube very soon and sharing the link with everyone who registered and who wants to know more about this. So, and we will also be putting the links to the YERC challenges so that you can go ahead and check them out and see all the interesting things that Andy, all the incentives you have for you get if you compete in these competitions. So thanks again, guys. Thanks to everyone who joined us today, and hope to see you all participate in the YERC competitions. Hey, Andy, you have something?
And Harshit, before we sign off, I just also want to send out a huge thank you to Nate Brocker, who's been program managing this effort. Robbie Roberts over on the YERC side, who's been guiding the technology decisions, and all of our co-pilots and members who've contributed so far. I can't wait to put up graffiti and have everybody's names on the system.
That would be great. I'm so excited to hear that you shared that right in the end, and that is so cool. Having your name on the website, and that is going to be so amazing. So yeah. Once again, I think we will post the video, and you can go ahead and check the webinar again if you missed, or if you want to know, listen to it really slow and listen more, in depth. So go ahead and check out the recording, and we hope to see you compete in the competitions. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.